Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front wheel hub, which has your front wheel bearing, in a 2002 Dodge Dakota SXT two-wheel drive version. This is the V6 model. Now, what ended up happening on this is the brakes went metal to metal, completely metal to metal, or the brake pad is completely gone. You can see over here as well, this brake pad is completely gone. And because of that, that generated so much heat in here that all of the grease started splattering out. I originally thought that the seals in the caliper had blown out, but it didn't quite come far enough out to do that. So we're able to save these calipers and reuse them, but we are going to go ahead and change the wheel bearing. It's a little bit easier just to change the entire hub assembly, so that's what we ordered. Now, if you look closely here on the wheel, you can see all these lines, these splatters. That's actually wheel bearing grease. So the bearing has gotten so hot and the grease has come out. You can see a little bit of it in there. This is just cooked, and this is now no good. So we're going to go ahead and do the brakes, but we're also going to change that wheel bearing. Just going to pry out this spring here first. There we go. All right, and I'm just going to use a pry bar to push the caliper piston back in. You can also take this off and use a C-clamp or a caliper compression tool. Now, this should work just fine. Before you do this, just double check that you've got enough room in the master cylinder to be able to handle the additional fluid going up into it. All right, now we can loosen and remove these two slide pin bolts. Those are 7mm Allen or hex. Now, sometimes these don't pop right out like that, especially if they're gummed up. If that's the case, you can just take the caliper off, push them through, but if they do come out, just set them aside. All right, and then we can pull off the caliper, and just don't let that drop or dangle by the brake hose here. So I'm just gonna grab a little hook here, see if I can just hang this up out of the way. Just hang it up there on that control arm. You can see that's completely gone. You know, a lot of brakes have a little squealer or a little noisemaker. Unfortunately, this model does not. Even the replacement pads don't come with one. That's why it's very important, if you hear any brake noises or any squeaks or squeals, it's very important that you stop and get it looked at, because in this case, not only do we need to buy a new rotor, but we're having to do this bearing because of the additional heat that it created, and it blew out all the grease. Now, we also, it looks like we're getting lucky here. This rotor is just going to come right off. If it doesn't come off easily like that, you can just hit it with a sledgehammer. A lot of times right here on the face or right here on the top, all the way around, we'll break that loose, and then just give it a few good whacks and you should be able to get that off. I'm going to put my microphone right down here and see if you can hear the bearing. It should be really smooth and you shouldn't really hear anything or any friction at all, but listen to this. So there you go. Not only that, but even all the metal shavings that are all around here from that rotor, a lot of them might have gotten their way or worked their way into that bearing, so that noise is definitely no good. I already did the brakes on the other side and the bearing was fine, so we didn't change that one. I'm just going to change this one here because of the issue. Now, the parts store only had one wheel bearing hub in stock, so that's the one I got for this side. You should generally do bearings and stuff like this in pairs or per axle, but in this case, you know, we didn't go metal to metal. We didn't have the grease blowing out of the other side, so for right now, I think we're fine just to do this side, and I'll just let the owner know just to kind of keep an eye on that other side, and it might be something that they decide to have me do in the future. All right, now to take this nut off, you need a 35mm socket. We're going to use the big impact to break that loose. 2767, that should do it. Let's just make sure that that's on the higher setting. Now let's see if that'll go. No problem. Now, I didn't get a replacement nut, so I'm going to run to the store and see if they do have this, because you can see right there it says, do not reuse. So you do not want to reuse this. We're going to go see if we can find a replacement. All right, then we should be able to just pull this off. Wow, that did just come right off. Look at all those metal shavings on the inside there. I'm surprised that that came off so easily. It just came right off that shaft there, so that's good. It's always nice when something works out. I just want to make sure we don't end up with anything or any grit inside there. That prevents that from seating properly. I'm just going to use some brake clean here on this bracket just to knock some of these shavings off there too. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of this grease on here. That'll just make it easier to put the new bearing on. Make sure that this is nice and clean and protected. I probably put on a little too much. All right, and then we can put the new hub bearing assembly on. Interestingly enough, this did not come with the hub, so make sure that you do order that separately, or just make sure that you do pick that up. But for right now, we're just gonna get that nice and snug. Now I just made that snug with my impact on a low setting, but we're gonna do the final torque on that when we get it back on the ground with the wheel on. All right, now we can pull the old pads out of the caliper here, and the inside pad just comes out. It's got these 3 little prongs, and that just squeezes right in there to the face of the caliper piston. And then this one here, the outside, it's got 2 little parts that extend and go into these little open holes. So you kind of need to pull these ones down just a little bit, and then you can slide it out like that. Now, before I put the new pad in, just for kind of ease of installation, I'm gonna hit the back of this shim here with a little bit of this caliper grease. You know, I usually put that on the back of pads just to kind of help dampen some of the vibrations. Now, we really don't need much. It's really just a thin layer, but getting a little bit underneath these little hooks right here will help this slide into place. And for whatever reason, putting a little bit of grease on all the metal contact points helps to keep that nice and quiet. So let's put on the outside pad first. So you just kind of push that down as you push it in at an angle, and then it locks in place. Same with the inside pad. A little bit of that brake grease here on these 3 prongs will also help it slide into the piston here. That just will help eliminate some of that noise and vibration, and it will hopefully help these pins drop into place too. Just be careful not to get any grease on the friction surface of the pad. We'll just line that up. There we go. All right, now before I put the new rotor on, I'm just gonna put a really thin coat of this anti-seize on the hub right here. Kind of this little shoulder seems to be where a lot of the rotors will get stuck. Doesn't take much, but that will help take the rotor off next time. Now, before we put on the brake rotor, it's a good idea to wipe those off with some brake clean, because they are packed with some sort of an oil which will keep them from rusting. And then we can put that on. Before I put the caliper back on, these little edges right here where the pads ride, I'm going to clean those up with a wire wheel. Just make sure you wear some safety glasses if you're going to use something like this. Now this spot I noticed does wear. You can see there's a little bit of wear right there from where the old brake pad backing plate was rubbing. So I am gonna hit that with a little bit of this brake grease. I doubt this will do much. These get so hot that most of that silicone grease just kind of slides or melts right off. But I think it might leave behind a little bit of a film which will hopefully protect that metal, not only from rusting, but allow the brake pads to slide on that little edge. So now we can grab the caliper, put that back on. I'm just gonna reach up here, unhook that. Just make sure that when you put this back on that you don't twist the brake line. I've seen a lot of times where guys will be working on this and they'll spin that around, maybe not realizing it, and they'll end up twisting that, and that brake line can kink, which cause the wheel to pull to one side. So make sure that it's not kinked when you put this back on, but that should just line up like that. Just line those pads up over the rotor and press that in place. Now, before we put these 2 little slide pins in, I just clean these up. And I just like to hit these with a little bit of that caliper grease as well. That's way too much. Perfect. I'm just gonna spin those around and kind of spread that grease around. Basically, that just allows these to slide in there without getting stuck. Kind of have to push a little bit on the caliper to get that lined up. Now we'll just get these started by hand, just to make sure we're not cross-threading anything. And then we'll just get these snugged on real quick. Now the torque spec that I found for these is 22 foot-pounds. Now this spring can be a little tricky to put back on, but what I found is if you just get it started at the bottom, you see just this little piece right here, put it behind that bracket, and then get this one in the hole first. Then when you bring it around here, you need to push this into that hole before you bend this tab all the way forward. A little screwdriver or pry bar will work for that. Kind of just have to push it in like this. So if we just get a couple screwdrivers or a pry bar, look at that. Just popped right in. Just make sure that that's all the way in, and then just push on it, make sure it's fully seated. Make sure that you don't have any rubbing on the rotor. We're clear here, so it looks like we're good to go. We're gonna go ahead and put the wheel back on before we torque this to the 185 foot-pounds. You could also just put a large screwdriver in between here in the little vents in the rotor. It would prevent that from rotating, but it's easier just to throw on the tire, so that's what we're gonna do. Now, before we put the wheel on, we need to pop this center cap out, and I'm just gonna tap it from behind with the handle here of the pry bar. It should just pop right out, like so. And then we can put the wheel on. Put all these lug nuts back on. We'll wash this and get this all cleaned up when we're done, but just gonna lower the vehicle so it's sitting on the wheel. Using this 35mm socket, we're gonna torque this to 185 foot-pounds. And pop the cap back in. And you're done. Now, before you drive off, it's important that you step on the brake pedal several times, which will push that caliper piston back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. When you do that, don't press the pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just press it about halfway several times until it feels firm. And then don't forget to check under the hood, double check your master cylinder fluid level, make sure that that's topped off and where it needs to be. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description where you can pick up some of these parts and tools as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.